Joshua chapter 12 is where we stopped. Now, please bring your Bibles to church, please, and pay attention. And this is a true Bible study. Joshua chapter 12, and I'm going to summarize some of this because we don't need to read every single word in some of these passages. For you, verse 9 of chapter 12 lists the kings, and that's really what this chapter is pretty much about. Chapter 12 is the list of defeated kings. And some are very noteworthy. For example, if you look at verse 2, Sihon, king of the Amorites. If you look at verse 4, in the territory of Og, king of Bashan. One of the last of the Rephaites. Why does it tell us that? He's one of the last of the Rephaites. Because the Rephaites were giants. When you go back, and I'll just take a quick peek, when you go back to Joshua chapter 2, Rahab tells the spies that had come in to spy out the land of promise. We've heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to Sihon and Og, the two kings of the Amorites east of the Jordan, whom you completely destroyed. I mean, you beat those guys to death. And they were amazed. Amos chapter 2, verse 9. Let me just read you that one verse. Amos chapter 2, verse 9. God says about the Amorites, I destroyed the Amorite before them, before Israel. Though he was tall as the cedars and strong as oaks. Sihon and Og were two of those giants. Tallest American I know of was this guy here. If you got that, you can put it up. He's tall. Robert Pershing Wadlow. He died young. Won't get into that. But it says he showed no indication of an end to his growth even at the time of his death. He possessed great physical strength until the last year of his life. He was known as Alton Giant. He was also known as the Giant of Illinois. Any Illinoisers? He's your man. That's the guy you want on the basketball team right there. But let me show you something else. Put up that second slide. This is fascinating. These are skeletons that have been unearthed over the years. Now, I'm not going to detail every one of them, but I got the detail right here. I mean, when you get at the guy that's 13 feet, you go, wow, he's taller than the Illinois basketball guy. And then 19.5 feet, and then 23 feet. But they found not one, but two. 36 feet tall. It says here, almost beyond comprehension or believability was the find of two separate 36-foot human remains uncovered by the Carthaginians between 200 and 600 BC. Thank you very much for the slide. Now, true Bible study. Here's what you would not necessarily notice in a casual reading of the text. You'd have to really think about it. You'd have to really stop and pause and really check it out to get this, what I'm about to give you. And I'm not saying I'm anything for giving it to you, but you pay me to have time to do those kind of things, stop and meditate and really study the text. And here's what it says, verse 6 of chapter 12. Moses, the servant of the Lord, and the Israelites conquered them, including Sihon and Og, renowned giant. And Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave their land to the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh to be their possession, because God agreed to let these tribes possess the land on the east side of the Jordan before crossing the Jordan into technically the heart of the land of promise. Why is that significant? Here's why it's significant. What are we studying? What book? Joshua. Sihon and Og were defeated by Moses and that generation, and they were a faithless generation. Let me bring it a little closer to home. You go back to Numbers chapter 13. Numbers chapter 13. Not really closer to home, just more clear of what I'm trying to say. Numbers chapter 13, when Moses sent the spies into the land, verse 26, they came back to Moses and Aaron and the whole Israelite community at Kadesh. There they reported to them and to the whole assembly and showed them the fruit of the land. They gave Moses this account. We went into the land, and let me just summarize, and it's everything God said it was. But, verse 28, the people who live there are powerful, and the cities are fortified and very large. We even saw descendants of Anak there. So as you know, if you've been with us, they say the land's everything God said, but there's no way we can have victory there because there are giants there, descendants of Anak, which tells me if Moses and the faithless generation conquered kingdoms and kings like Sihon and Og, then the kings and the people on the other side, the west side of the Jordan, were even bigger and more fierce. Because these spies came back and said, we seem like grasshoppers to them. And you get the idea of that 36-foot skeleton. I mean, these were bad, big, bad dudes. In Numbers chapter 30, Numbers chapter 13, where I was just reading, in verse 29, the Amalekites live in the Negev, the Hittites, Jebusites, Amorites live in the hill country, and the Canaanites live near the sea and along the Jordan. And they're saying, these guys, they're just so big and they're so bad, we can't do it. And verse 30, then Caleb silenced the people. I don't know how he did that. Hey! And he yells because they're just giving all this bad report, and he gets their attention. He silences the people. Hey, wait a minute. I got something to say. We should go up and take possession of the land, for we can certainly do it. But the men who had gone up with him said, we can't attack these people. They're stronger than we are. And they spread among the Israelites a bad report about the land they had explored. They said, the land we explored devours those living in it. All the people we saw there are of great size. We saw the Nephilim there. The descendants of Anak come from the Nephilim. We seem like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we look the same to them. Then you get to chapter 14. That night all the people of the community raised their voices and wept aloud. Oh, why did God bring us out here? And everything's just so terrible, and these giants, and we can't have any blessing, and we came for the blessing, but we can't get it because, and they're just make you sick. And he got one lone voice, a man of faith. No, we can do it. Verse 6, chapter 14, Joshua, son of Nun and Caleb, son of Jephunneh, who were among those who had explored the land, tore their clothes. They're so frustrated. They tore their clothes. Tear their clothes because of all this faithless talk. But even though Joshua here joins in 40-some years earlier with Caleb, the people wouldn't have it. They wouldn't hear it. You want a shocker? The opening of verse 10 of Numbers chapter 14, the whole assembly talked about stoning them. Here they are speaking words of faith. No, we can do it. No, we can't do it. Yes, we can do it. They talked about stoning them. And as a result of the faithlessness of a whole congregation, Joshua and Caleb had to endure 40-plus years. Imagine being in that kind of church. Imagine having pastor peers around you, and you want to take a step of faith, and they give all the reasons why you can't do it. Miserable. Let me remind you of something. Throughout the Bible and history, the crowd is usually wrong. And time after time again, even among God's chosen people, sometimes a majority of leaders are wrong. And I'm not talking about my situation. You're thinking, you're talking about your situation. I'm not talking about my situation. I'm just telling you, you just check it out. That's the way it is. And it's difficult to find in biblical history the majority jumping on board and saying, yes, we can do it. You have these lone voices saying, let's go, let's get them. We have God on our side. Well, we can't do it. Shut up. We can do it. So the next generation has entered the promised land. They won victory after victory. They're a blessed people. That's where we are in our study. I spent those 12 or so minutes reminding us, because of where we are today, and that's Joshua chapter 13. After a listing of tremendous victory after victory after victory, and a list of these kings that had been defeated now on the west side of the Jordan. And I have to believe some giants that were bigger and badder than Sihon and Og. And the bigger they were, the harder they fell. And notice what God says. God does not mince words. Look at chapter 13. You have to know, I just love God. Listen to what he says to Joshua. When Joshua was old and well advanced in years, the Lord said to him, you're very old. He just don't mince words. He doesn't say, you've matured over the years. He said, dude, you are old and well advanced in years. And the Lord said to him, you're very old, and there are still very large areas of land to be taken over. Now, you stop and pause on that one for a minute. And let me tell you, I know what God is not saying to Joshua. Here's what I know Joshua is not hearing from the Lord. It's not what the Lord's saying. You're too old to do it anymore. Pass the baton. In your younger days, you can go out and fight some giants, and God gave you great victory. But have you looked in the mirror lately? You're too old. God's not saying you're too old. He just said you're old. And there's a lot more yet to conquer. Now, how do I know that God's not saying pass the baton, don't go out to battle anymore? How do I know that? You just look at it in the context. Now, before we look at it in the context, I was reminded of something Pete Froh in our fellowship gave me probably a little over a year ago. Gave me a T-shirt. One of my favorite T-shirts. And it says right here, a little thing says, "Old guys rule." You know when somebody gives you a T-shirt like that, you go away and start to meditate on it and you think, was that a good thing or a bad thing? Was he trying to be encouraging? Or was he just saying, you're old, dude? Now, I'm like most males, whether we admit it or not. I'm not extremely observant sometimes. My wife and I were at Busch Gardens the other day just walking around. I love to go over there and look at the animals and walk and get exercise. And sometimes we're just there for an hour. You know, it take longer to drive over there than it does to walk around, but we'd love to do it. And we're there, and I said, look, this trip, here's what we're going to do. We're going to notice things we've never noticed before, and I'm a Busch Gardens expert. And with my wife with me, she begins to say, did you notice that? And I go, I've never noticed that. And it's very humbling when you're with your wife because, you know, she probably pointed out 4 things that day that I had never noticed at Busch Gardens before. And you know what I had never noticed since I had this T-shirt? I never noticed it. Now, I knew it on the front. It said, "Old guys rule," but I don't look on the back a whole lot because it's on my back, right? Well, it says larger letters, "Old guys rule," but then right underneath that, here's what it says: on permanent vacation. And I don't know if Pete saw that when he bought the shirt. He's a guy too. He probably didn't notice it. Now, I like the old guys rule, but on permanent vacation is not biblical. I don't know what your goal is. I don't know what retirement means to you, but I can tell you what it means to God. Retirement is called heaven. And if you believe the American dream lie, that you just want to stack it up, build it up, so that you can take all the trips you want to take, and go to the places you never got to go, and walk on the beach and look for seashells. What a pitiful, pitiful life. Some 40 years before, it was Caleb who stepped forward. He was the first voice of faith among a faithless people. And then after he spoke up, Joshua said, yeah, Caleb, that's it. But even though they're joining forces, 2 voices now of faith, they still couldn't convince the rest of the people. Watch what happens here. Chapter 13, when Joshua was old and well advanced in years, the Lord said to him, you're very old, and there's still very large areas of land to be taken over. And then he starts listing the land that remains. And then, chapter 13 lists some of the inheritance that Moses gave to the other tribes. Then you get to chapter 14, and it opens this way. Now, these are the areas the Israelites received as an inheritance in the land of Canaan. Past victories. And then you get to verse 6 of chapter 14. Now the men of Judah approached Joshua at Gilgal, and Caleb, son of Jephunneh, said to him, you know what the Lord said to Moses, the man of God at Kadesh Barnea, about you and me? I was 40 years old when Moses, the servant of the Lord, sent me from Kadesh. Barnea to explore the land. And I brought him back a report according to my convictions of faith. But my brothers who went up with me made the hearts of the people melt with fear. I, however, followed the Lord my God wholeheartedly. So on that day Moses swore to me, the land on which your feet have walked will be your inheritance and that of your children. You're going to pass something on to your kids because you follow the Lord my God wholeheartedly. Now then, just as the Lord promised, He's kept me alive for 45 years since the time He said this to Moses, while Israel moved about in the desert. So here I am today, 85 years old. I'm still as strong today as the day Moses sent me out. Now, I don't want to stop there for just a minute. I'm not sure that's true on a physical level. I don't know for sure. But I don't believe at 85 you're as strong as you were at 40. But let me tell you something. You can be stronger at 85 by faith than you were at 40. And I think that's what he's talking about. I'm still as strong today as the day Moses sent me out. I'm just as vigorous to go out to battle now as I was then. Now give me this hill country that the Lord promised me that day. You yourself heard that the Anakites, the giants, were there and their cities were large and fortified, but the Lord helping me, I'll drive them out just as He said. Give me that giant. And then Joshua blessed Caleb and gave him Hebron as his inheritance. So Hebron has belonged to Caleb ever since because he followed the Lord, the God of Israel, wholeheartedly. Now, I love the little note here in the parenthesis in verse 15. Hebron used to be called Kiriath Arba after Arba, who was the greatest man among the Anakites. He was the 36-foot guy. And Caleb went in at 85 years old and cleaned his clock. You want to be a grandkid of Caleb. Any Caleb granddads here? The title was easy. Lessons from an old giant killer. And if you let it go in this ear and out this ear, and all you've done is come to a church service, I feel sorry for you. But if you listen for the last few minutes, and then become like Caleb, what do you learn from this guy? Perseverance, that's the first thing. 45 years. 45 years. 45 years. 45 years of what? Being around a bunch of faithless, grumbling people. People that just complained about life and complained about not being able to do it. We like that, but we can't do it. And why did God do this? And why is this happening? I mean, faithless people. And Joshua and Caleb had to endure that for 40 plus years of being around, being in that kind of a church. I mean, sit around. I've sat around. It's so miserable. I've sat around at times among fellow pastors. And when we talk about a vision and stepping out and maybe a new open door and all the reasons why we can't do it, it makes me sick. Don't tell me all the reasons why we can't do it. If it's God leading us, I don't care how big it is. It doesn't matter. Hebrews 10:36, you need to persevere so that when you've done the will of God, you'll receive what He has promised. And sometimes you got to wait for it. Sometimes it's not your fault that you got to wait for it. That was Caleb. He had to wait. Him and Joshua both, they'd have been bathing in the streams of the land of promise, eating the grapes, and they'd have been enjoying all that, but they couldn't convince the other leaders. 3 John, or 2 John, that little letter in the New Testament, verse 8. Listen to it. Watch out that you do not lose what you've worked for, but that you may be rewarded fully. The context of that text is continuing to walk in truth practically, doctrinally. Paul wrote to Timothy, watch your life and doctrine closely. Persevere in them, because if you do, you'll save both yourself and your hearers. And the context of that is that you might receive the promises of God. That's the context. You can get discouraged and you can say, well, God just never meant to do it. I mean, Abraham got perplexed. He and Sarah, because they went years and years and years, and they're beyond physically being able to have children. But God wanted to do a miracle, and He did do a miracle. And you may be going, I've been waiting, I've been praying for this for years and years and years and years. God must not want me to have it. How do you know that? Don't give up. You say it would take a miracle. Right on. Have you forgotten the God you serve? And then when He does it, He's the only one that can get the credit. So sometimes you just get discouraged. But in other times you get tired of waiting and you go do something stupid. Sometimes you just, you let your guard down and you take a break from the battle like David did, and you go out and there's Bathsheba, and you know that story. You know what God said to him after that? Let me read you one little segment. 2 Samuel chapter 8, and God reminds him of all the blessing He'd given him. Gave him family and kingship and all the material things that came with it. And here's what God said, if all this had been too little, I would have given you more. I wasn't ready to stop blessing you. Well, why'd you go do something so stupid? And he had the one night stand, and then he tried to cover it up, and it didn't work, and he plotted and he planned, and he murdered Bathsheba's husband. And one mistake after another. And it forfeited future blessing. Now, let me put a little footnote there. If you look back and there's been failure, if you look back and maybe you're older now, maybe God looks at you, or you look in the mirror, you go, you old, dude. And you look back and you say, I made this mistake and that mistake, and maybe you're divorced more than once. But you look back at all the mistakes. Here's the wonderful thing about our God. You can't go back and change it. And so stop beating yourself up over it. A bruised reed He will not break. A smoldering wick He will not snuff out. Some people sitting around now and they're crying in their beer. And you go, I just didn't know if I could do it. Just shut up, will you? Because that's faithless. That's faithless. You're living in some morbid world where you're just disappointed in all the mistakes you made. Well, get over it. Get it under the blood and look ahead. Because even though you may have forfeited blessing in the past, there's blessing for you in the future if you just grab it by faith. And get back up and face the giant in your life. Oh, you're getting me worked up this morning. You must really need this. I got 5 points in this 10:05. Perseverance, patience. In James 5, brothers, as an example of patience in the face of suffering, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. We consider them blessed who have persevered. And there you have patience and perseverance in one verse. Because if you're going to persevere, you're going to need patience. Then it mentions Job. You've heard of Job's perseverance and have seen what the Lord finally brought about. In the context of Job, it wasn't anything he did wrong. It wasn't anything Caleb did wrong to have to spend 40 plus years with a faithless generation. Look at Job. What did he do? all the things that happened in his life. You talk about being perplexed. You talk about being in a position to just throw in the towel. His wife's saying, just curse God and die. And he said, shall we accept good from God and not evil? Are we not going to trust him in the bad times just like we do in the good times? And then after Job suffered, who knows how many years, God restored him twice as much. Twice as much in the end. Don't you give up. I don't care how old you are. Don't you give up. Perseverance, patience. And the third one, this is one that's challenging. Zeal. Romans 12:11. Don't be lacking in zeal. Keep your spiritual fervor. Now, I wish he'd have given us 5 points under that to tell us exactly how to do that. He doesn't. How do you keep your zeal? That's a hard one to answer. You stop moping around. When you feel like giving up, you by faith say, I feel like quitting, but by faith I'm not going to. I feel like just walking on the beach and looking for seashells the rest of my life. Well, you feel like doing it, but don't do it. Go get 2 seashells, put them on the shelf, and get back to work. Nobody needs more than 2 seashells. I mean, if they're nice ones. Zeal. God's renewed my zeal. I don't know if you can tell. And I don't know if you realize, and we ain't gonna get off on a focus on Danny, but I'm gonna tell you what, there's a testimony standing right here. I'm gonna tell you that. And I say that humbly. I am so excited I can hardly contain myself. Every time I drive to this facility, I look around. I have never in 34 years of pastoring been in the heart of a residential community, and it's all I can do to hold back from going out. Me and Jairus both, we're chomping at the bit, and others are too. Dan and others around it, we're chomping at the bit to go out and reach this community. And some of you have to leave the church, so we have to give them a place to sit. You know, by church growth standards, we're 80% full, you're full. Well, we're full. But I've never gone by the church standards. When the choir's full, we're full. Some of you joined the choir and then you quit. You get your best view of me right up there. I don't know why in the world you wouldn't take that seat every week. I got so much zeal now. We had a calendar planning meeting with a core group of our leaders yesterday. It was one of the most delightful meetings I've ever been in my life. It was filled with faith. It was no negativity. It was no, well, we can't do that. How are we going to do that? It's like, yeah, let's go get them. Filled with laughter and the way he walked. It was just a great meeting. And I can't get off 10:09. Oh, God, what preachers say. Look. I called a few weeks ago because I thought I want to do a sunrise service, and last sunrise service, at the old church, and we had some 2,000 people down there and all the people making decisions for Christ. And I'm thinking, where are we going to go to put more people? And then I thought, well, we got less people right now in this new work, but we ought to do a sunrise service. That's a great outreach opportunity, and it's also a great time to get together and worship the Lord and be reminded of the resurrection. And so I called. I just thought I'd call by faith the Parks Department, and I heard what I thought I'd hear. Well, there's a church that's got Elva Rouse. Well, yeah, I know that church. And and I said, is there anything else available? And I said, well, no, there's nothing else available. And then there's a little pause, and she comes back. She said, well, I don't understand this, but there is one park available. I said, really? She said, the Vinoy Basin is available. And we got it. We got it. I got to move on. I got to close this out. But I'm telling you what, I'm excited. Man, oh man. It's better parking. It's more space. It's everything you'd wanted. It's the promised land of sunrise service. I'll tell you what else we learned from Caleb and from Joshua. Faith and courage. Faith and courage. Faith and courage. And last but not least, vision. The eagle has 8 times as many visual cells per cubic centimeter than a human. This translates into some pretty astounding capabilities. Flying at 600 feet elevation, an eagle can spot an object the size of a dime moving through 6-inch grass. It can see 3-inch fish jumping in a lake 3 miles away. I like to see that when I'm in the Gulf of Mexico looking for fish. It sees what others miss. Everybody knows the story of David, right? David, where he goes out, and as a young man, he faces Goliath. And everybody's shocked because David is too young to go out. He's too young to go out and face a giant like Goliath. And even King Saul tries to put his own armor on David. And David walks around and tries it out. And David says, I can't go out like this. I'm not used to this. You serve him when he was watching the sheep. And a lion had come, and I'd go, and I took the lion by the mane. And God delivered the lion into my hands. A bear come, and I go, and I kill the bear. And as God delivered the lion and the bear in my hands, so this Philistine will be nothing. And we love the story of young David. And we go, yeah, man, young and full of courage and full of faith. And it hit me yesterday after I finished the majority of the notes for this study that this story is the exact opposite. And yet it's the same. David goes out and you go, you're just a youth, you can't go out and face that giant. David goes, what are you talking about? You know the God I serve? And here's a young man full of faith. And if you think this message is for old people, you are right. But if you think it's only for old people, you are wrong. Caleb, 45 years later. And now I picture Caleb. He comes out. He's got his walker. I'm just as strong today as I was 45 years ago. And them giants, when he comes into the land with his walker, they say the same thing they said to David. They say, what are you little pipsqueak? I'm going to feed you. You're a little flea. And David said, you come to me with sword and spear, but I come to you in the name of the Lord God of Israel. And people are going, that's ridiculous. No, that's faith, and that's courage. And you see somebody now, and you say, oh, man, you got a lot of stories to tell, don't you? Yeah, but they're not as good as the one that I'm going to tell. Because I'm not done yet. You say, what can I do? What are you talking about? Somebody said that to Corrie ten Boom once, and I don't know if you know that name, surviving Nazi Germany and all that, and becoming a tremendous woman of faith and having a great large ministry, but in her waning years, in her older years, when she can't even get around on a walker, she's assigned to a hospital bed. And Pastor Chuck Smith was used by the Lord to go to her and say, Corrie, your greatest ministry may yet be ahead of you. And she became more of a prayer warrior. And the battle she fought and the battle she won from a hospital bed were in some ways greater than the battles she won with a worldwide ministry.